I'll just adjust my hair and we'll be good to go. Hey, I had to be in wardrobe and makeup at 8. That's why.
Exactly. 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 All right. Thank you, everybody, for. Oh, I clipped. Let me do that again. Don't want to clip. Don't want to clip, but I'm going to sit right here so I don't move around. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. My guest tonight is a man who has an extensive resume. He's been a part of so many different groups. He's been in Motown groups, rock, uh, pop rock, all that kind of cool stuff. He's also taken very serious training in jazz and classical, and he's also toured around the country, I think more than once. Ladies and gentlemen, the Power Viking himself, Brett Sandler. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here and talking with you.
You're serving me Power Viking realness.
I try. It's what I'm going for these days.
Do you remember when we were both into intermittent fasting, and then
Uh,
we both left that?
well, I started back up, trying to battle quarantine here, so to speak. Battle the quarantine, the COVID-19,
Yeah, I
yeah,
thought it was the quarantine 15.
the 19 pounds you gained during the quarantine.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
I'm trying.
lost I lost 10 pounds just by counting calories and going for walks. And then I just one day, I think Marie ordered like brownies on Amazon or something, and I made them, and then I
Yeah,
forgot. Just like the past 3 weeks had just been eradicated from my mind. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, pancakes, why not?
yeah. It's so easy to sort of attenuate your boredom with food during quarantine. So
So I'm so glad you're here. So far as we are recording this, I've you're the third recorded, and you will be probably the third or fourth released, because I don't want to hit people with the double Nashville too early. But the reason that I wanted to talk to you is because you have a very extensive and a very unique um, musical background. How you got to where you are. I'd love for you to share your story. Obviously, there are moments where you and I have connected and then done different things and come back together again, which is great. But I think you're kind of at the before this quarantine, you've been sort of at the peak of your career, which I think is excellent.
um, I would say so. It's definitely right before quarantine happened. I was definitely playing on the biggest stages that I've played on before, and playing with groups that probably had the most notoriety of anyone I've played with before, and was just kind of starting to scratch ever so slightly into the studio scene here. And I was sort of scheduled to play with a act that had a supporting slot, which just means opening up for. They were going to open for John Legend. The name of the band was called
Yeah,
The War and the Treaty. That was scheduled for this August, September. That may still happen. Who knows? But
yeah,
you know, the COVID-19 is really putting a damper on everything.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
do you want the?
the musicians would probably do it, but they they would be playing for nobody. So let's work up to that.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
so
you want the
uh,
long version, the short version?
oh,
How
we got
far back do you want me to
we're
start?
gonna go back. We're gonna start before I met you, which is I mean, to everybody, why would they even care? And when I say everybody, I mean there's three viewers. It's my mom and my dad and me. That's it.
Okay.
Um,
Well, hi,
so
Neil.
yeah, we'll find Neil. So you've been playing piano all your life, but when did it become a thing where you were like, yeah, I think I'm going to keep this as a major part of my life?
I want to say the first time I had one of those realizations was 13 or 14. It was actually sort of a moment, um, I would say, of disinterest, where I was sort of becoming tired of what I had been practicing and playing through, which I think is pretty common for musicians as they go through their career, especially if they're doing one thing, like for instance, doing classical music. They may find that their interest level sort of waxes and wanes. So mine was waning, But my thought process was I have way too much invested at this point to give it up. You know, I didn't want to stop playing because my skills would go away. And I didn't want to give up on the ability to play piano, and I wanted to stick it out. And the reason I was having disinterest in the piano is because a lot of the music that I was listening to and gravitating to at the time was more guitar-centric, guitar-based. Lots of, you know, for me, I was 13, 14. I was listening to a lot of like the 90s grunge that was super popular through that era and was still getting a lot of airplay, you know, in the early 2000s. And lots of like metal and progressive rock, which is eventually how you and I would link up a little bit later on. There was a band in town called Pitch Axis Theory. I thought they were the coolest thing in the world.
That band has been mentioned twice already in these videos.
It's a small world,
There's going
and
to be a revival, I think.
They were really into Dream Theater and everything. So that was kind of the first realization I had that piano, or at least music in general, was going to be a huge part of my life. And that I wasn't just going to give it up because I didn't enjoy playing piano at that moment.
But at 13 or 14, that's kind of a difficult thing to rationalize. It sounded like you came to it with a heavy, with a balanced, you know, thought process about this, because, you know, in my teaching experience, and then if I can remember back when I was that age, things are so hot and cold. I mean, you sounded like you were a 28-year-old, you know, married woman at 13 years old saying, well, I have invested a lot of time and money. But so what was the thing that you were thinking? Like, oh, I'll find stuff that I like to play, or?
My thinking was always that I would continue to play piano, but that I was going to explore guitar, maybe transition to it. I had some guitar lessons from your former classical teacher, Christopher Ladd, on electric guitar. And Christopher Ladd used to be a big metalhead in his youth. And so we were learning and listening to things like Yngwie Malmsteen and Metallica. That was how I kind of was looking at it, I think at least when I was 13 or 14. The benefit of hindsight and having been a music educator, so through my 20s, basically, I was teaching piano lessons. And I think you know this too, is that different instruments, I would say, have different reward curves, if you could put it that way. I think an instrument like guitar, the reward curve, there's a lot of weight right at the beginning where you can show a student, like, here's G, D, and C. All right, you can now play, you can play
80% of what you know.
Yeah, you can play a lot of different things with just some very simple chord shapes. I think if you're a very young student and you start piano, there's a lot of joy to the discovery of piano, but you inevitably hit this, I would say, late beginner to intermediate, like early intermediate stage, where the returns on your time start to slow down unless you happen to be some kind of prodigy. And I think everyone kind of has to slog through this sort of phase before they really truly, you know, kind of start to hit the advanced part of piano. And I think when you hit the advanced part of the reward curve, that's where like a lot of the reward is weighted. So there's like a little in the front, not much in the middle, and then things really just go up like this towards the end.
Do you think that's a product of the rep, or sort of the accepted route of the way it's taught, of the pedagogy?
That's a really good question. So my own personal experience would suggest that repertoire is just not as rewarding in the middle stage. I mean, you're really, if you're a strict classical student, or you're working off of some like methodology, like a Bastion or something like that, whatever it is your teacher is using to teach you, the pieces that you're going to play, I personally was not that attracted to or excited by in the classical world. And you're almost always playing like abridged versions of songs anyways, right?
Right.
For you to play like the real war horses of classical music, you really need to reach this certain level of training where you're good enough to say, even attempt something like Chopin's Polonaise in A flat, right?
Right.
And, you know, I thought it was very interesting for me that I played some, you know, more difficult Chopin etudes, some Bartok, some things like that in the later stages of like 17 and 18, and then kind of wanted to step away from all that and didn't find it very rewarding because to me it was just notes on a page. That's the other thing too. I think that I didn't really get enough music theory in my younger years, and I think it's really hard sometimes to teach students music theory because it's not the most what's the word I'm looking for? It's not the most. It's not exciting. Yeah, it's not like exciting or the excitement level doesn't meet like the digestion level. You know, like what's required to.
Yeah.
So I didn't really like stick with theory or understand it. So when you get to this like intermediate, late intermediate place, and you're playing these pieces, and you get handed something like Clair de Lune, it's just like you might play like there might be like like a B double flat, right?
Yeah.
And you misread it. You know, you misread it and play A flat, and you know. That piece is in D flat major, and there's a key change at some point, I think, to the sharp key, moving towards C sharp major. I forget, to be honest with you, it's been some time. But you could play an A flat, and it's like it would sound right to your ear, but because you can't sort of digest all the notes and say, okay, you know, this chord is being treated as this, that particular note that you're reading doesn't make sense to you. And so you start to just say, but, you know, there's just these notes on the page, and you're attracted to different music. And so that kind of prompted the first shift.
I think that's indicative of jazz too, but very much classical music. Yeah. We understand classical music by looking back. There was no tonality in the time of Bach. Tonality didn't come till much later. So when he was writing music, we have to understand it today by today's standards, by looking through the standards of his lens. So if you don't understand the theory behind it, for whatever reason, if you're not interested in it, if it wasn't taught to you, then you can't play the piece, arguably, right? Because there's something that, just like if you were to go learn all the notes to something like Giant Step, and you could play it, your fingers could do it, but you didn't understand what was happening, then arguably it
wouldn't be a very rewarding experience, right?
Yeah.
That's really the crux of it. And I think a lot of classical students are sort of taught that way because it's just, here's the piece, here are the notes, here's what's right or what's wrong. There's no understanding of it. When I got to college, I flirted with some more guitar lessons, and I realized that I really didn't like guitar as an instrument, even though I love listening to guitars. For me, was just...
Wait. Where did you take lessons? You took it at school?
So yeah, I took, when I got to college, I knew that I didn't want to take classical piano anymore. I wasn't interested in doing that. I felt like I'd kind of done that for a while, and I wanted to explore a different thing. And basically the option was you could take classical lessons, you could take jazz lessons. Right. So I signed up to take jazz lessons, but I signed up to take jazz guitar lessons. Uh-oh. Like I said, I wanted to learn guitar. Yeah.
Because, like these notes don't sustain very long, do they? Why do they keep dying?
I think it's more the structure of guitar that drives me insane, which is, for me, I have to think about it as 6 pianos that have been laid on top of each other that are all moved over by a fifth, which one of the beautiful things about playing piano is just there's only one place to read any given note on the staff. There's a couple different ways to write some of the same notes, but just
it's in one place.
Right. C3 is C3.
I think it was, I forget who it was. It was some like legendary old school. Yeah, I'm going to be such a jerk for forgetting who this was. Jazz guitar player who said the piano is an instrument is an instrument of addition. The guitar is an instrument of multiplication. I understand that that's not how I think of it, but I understand what he's saying there, especially with something like jazz. I'm trying to look up and who your
Okay.
who
Fig-
your people were, your jazz people at Hofstra.
I don't know that quote, but oh gosh.
Who did
So
you take lessons with? Thomas Gurana, is that right?
no, oh my gosh, what is his name? It's Dr. Rick.
Dr. Rick.
His last name
Just call
is
me doctor.
his last name is not coming to me, but he is unfortunately deceased now. He passed
Ah, that's too
away.
bad.
So you won't find him
No.
on the roster. Gosh, why can't I remember this man's name?
So,
He was such a character too.
yeah.
You know, he would spend 30 to 40 minutes of our hour-long lesson just talking. I'd come in and be like, "Hey man, have you heard about this eBay website?" You know, he's a little,
That seems to be a quality among
yeah,
field
little
guitar teachers.
maybe a little behind the
Nice
curve
lad.
with everything.
Yeah.
This is 2006,
Yeah.
2007 for those of you who are trying to place this in time.
In eBay.
In eBay. So he was a character, and hopefully his name comes to me at some point in this podcast. But I realized I didn't really like jazz guitar, but I liked jazz, and what was attractive about it was that I was learning how the theory of music, the groundwork, like why things sounded good, how music is pieced together. So in my sophomore year, I basically had to beg the piano teacher, Dr. David Lama, to teach me because I wasn't technically a music major. Like I said, I had kind of had this little bit of a falling out with music. I wanted to explore some other things. I went into school as a film major. So, anyways, I convinced this guy to teach me, and he starts me off with, what would I think if I hadn't had a better attitude about it, I might have been a little put off. But basically, the first lesson was I walked in the door and he said, "Okay, go learn all your major, minor, melodic minor, harmonic minor scales, and come back to me next week." And I did that.
Yeah.
So I learned all the scales. I learned how to play them. And
It's a very college 101 thing to
yeah.
hear.
And then the next week was basically, okay, here's basic chord theory, like understanding how a chord is built off of each pitch, yada, yada, yada. In jazz, you're super concerned with the 2-5-1 chord progression, right? 2 minor 7, 5 dominant 7, 1 major 7. And there's a particular way of voice leading that on the piano that allows you to do rootless voicings. In jazz, with your left hand, as a piano player, you try to stay out of the way of the bass player. And so basically what you're doing is you're always playing thirds and sevenths of the chords. So the next exercise was this 2-5-1 exercise, and you had to basically play a 2-5-1 in every key. So it was a lot of this learning the building blocks of everything and then being able to put it in every major and minor key. And finally, after sort of doing all of that, I think maybe a month or a month and a half in, I finally got to learn my first song. And of course, with jazz, you just get a lead sheet and it's the melody and the chords. Now, if you're, a monophonic instrument like a saxophone or a trumpet, you're just usually responsible for playing the melody. If you have a good teacher, maybe they sit you down at the piano and, help you kind of navigate your way around the chords. So
This is for a jury?
No, I'm not even there. I'm just sort of saying, like, a saxophone player isn't always so concerned with the harmony as they are with the melody. They should be concerned with the harmony, though, right? Understanding the harmony is what will make them treat melodic ideas correctly.
Just play whatever.
Not so much. So anyways, basically learning pieces was putting together left-hand chording and right hand playing the melody, and then improvising over the chord changes, while your left hand continue to play the chord changes. And so I really fell in love with that. I fell in love with jazz. I fell in love with a lot of its richness of harmony. And I think if I could describe maybe like the first 20 years of my path through music, definitely harmony is what sort of attract me to music.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
definitely more than just your, 1 5 6 4. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was definitely looking for more than what you hear commonly in pop music.
It's funny you said rootless voicing before, which in classical music is like an oxymoron. So they're like,
Interesting.
no, I mean, I'm
Well,
sure
do you
you,
vary the root in your voicing so that it's not the lowest note at times?
sure, sure. And so
Okay,
that would
so
be
we
an inversion
we
of the
eventually learned how to do that as well too. There was a lot of varying the root, but always in jazz respecting the bass player's right to have the
right.
lowest tone or
Of course, of course.
pitch sort of in the sonic landscape, the frequency range.
Yeah.
Of course, that's an old rule from the days of playing bebop and is not always correct anymore, right? There are a lot of situations I would say in modern jazz where it'd be totally fine to play a root, but
Well, I would imagine it
it's
depends on the instrumentation. If you're in a duo with a drummer, right,
right. Well, okay, in
or a
that,
trio,
yeah, I mean, absolutely. In that case, it may be more appropriate for you to do left hand striding, where you play, say, the root in a fifth down low, and then hop your hand up and
right,
play some other part of it, or play like a hybrid bass line while you're adding in chords with your right and your left hand, or some combination of both. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
again, this is just like the most beginner
yeah.
way of attaching a tune, but it was good. I needed it. I needed it, and I needed sort of the this guy Dave Lama was essentially like a bitter old Italian man. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how, and I
Well,
say bitter.
you met my wife's grandfather.
Yeah, I say bitter with every ounce of love that I can because
Of
he
course.
really loved his students and he really wanted them all to do well. But he was always just sort of complaining about the performance of the Pittsburgh Steelers
Yeah,
or
yeah,
bad musicianship or things
yeah.
like that. There was. Go ahead.
No, no. So let's just move forward. So you got kind of a reboot there and a reinvigoration, attenuated, however you want to put it, in
Yeah,
college. But you didn't. You left college and then got a job in the finance world for a little bit.
yeah. So timing is everything, right? In both
Absolutely.
music and life. So I graduated in 2010, which was a economic downturn. And I had discovered through my time in college that I really wanted to play my own music and write my own music, which was this very sort of progressive jazz at the time, because hey, that's what I was studying, listening to. And I wanted to work in the music biz. And my senior year of college, I had interned for Sony Red, which is their independent distributor. And at the time, we were working with bands like Phoenix and 5 Seconds of Summer and Hot Shell Ray and things like that were being sort of passed through Red, which was sort of this one-stop shop for independent record labels to get promotional services, marketing, and distribution. This was back when CDs were still relevant. Just sort of
Not too
place.
long ago. 9 years, 10 years is like,
It may as well be an eon ago now.
yeah,
you know. So I was interviewing for a job, and I was considered to be one of the top picks, and I was really excited. I thought I was going to get to work at Red, and at the last minute, because of the financial downturn, they were worried about budget, and so they consolidated that role to have a financial element to it as well, which I had no training in or understanding of at the time. And so I didn't get that job. But I wanted to stay in New York. I had a girlfriend at the time in New York. My all of my college classmates were in New York, and the musicians who I had been writing with and playing with were in New York. I went to school at Hofstra. It's on Long Island, a lot of close proximity to New York City. Most kids after school, especially if they were in a creative field like film or music or art, television, whatever, moved to New York City.
hmm.
So I wanted to stay out there, and so I found a job selling prepaid debit cards. And I'd have to call up these check cashing vendors and try and get them to carry this product that we offered.
Yeah.
I hated it. I was not a fan. And so eventually I realized I had to quit that job, and I moved home. And at the time, I wasn't feeling so great about myself, and basically feeling a little bit depressed, and ended up sort of just stumbling into this job working at a piano shop that was local to my town. It sold pianos. And while I was minding, the room, the gallery, so to speak, where all the pianos were one day, this guy comes in and, he's asking me to show him the pianos. And so I'm sitting down at the pianos and I'm playing. And he's like, wow, would you ever consider teaching me? It's like, well, yeah, maybe. I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't really want to be a piano teacher at the time, but I wanted the money.
Yeah.
And so I took his card and I started teaching him. And that led to me becoming, having teaching sort of be my full-time job from about 22 all the way up until I would say 27, 28 is when I started to kind of split my time between performing and teaching.
Which, by the way, in your 20s, I mean, unless you have something really sweet lined up, teaching full time and not in a school setting, but in a private lesson setting, can be a shockingly lucrative
Oh, yeah.
thing, but
Yeah.
also incredibly fragile. Like unbelievably, it's like a glass house that you live
Yeah. So during that time, 2010 through like 2012, 13, everyone I knew didn't have a real job. They were working minimum wage jobs. And I was teaching these kids and charging $60 an hour or $30 for the half hour privately. And then I was charging the same at a studio where they took a little percentage off the top. So I teach like 2 or 3 kids a day and make like $180.
in. Yeah.
And meanwhile, my friends are slinging burgers or
Yeah.
working some minimum wage job and walking home with like $60 or $70 for the day.
Yeah.
It was really great money at the time. Unfortunately, with something like that, you're quite right. Like students cancel, things happen. There's a huge downturn in summer. So many students stop teaching for the summer. But there's an interesting phenomenon that happens when you teach, which is in order for you to teach something, you really have to know it very well. And there's this sort of paradigm that I'm sure has been heard before or said before by any teacher or student, which is oftentimes the teacher learns more from the lessons than the student does.
Absolutely.
And so I really got my musical chops together in that time. They had kind of waxed a little bit. I had become lazy. And what had happened was the studying of jazz had given me this great appreciation for how music fits together. And I found myself enjoying all kinds of different music, R&B and funk and even pop music. And as I got older, I started to perform with more and more cover bands. And we'll get to that in a second. But a big thing that happened to me was I once again found classical music appealing. And I also needed to take classical lessons because I was getting students who were intermediate classical students. And the thing about classical music is just like you mentioned, every period sort of has its own nuances to how it should be performed. You do not perform a turn from Baroque era music like you would Romantic era music. So there are these little things that if I felt bad if I would teach them to students incorrectly. And so I went to study classical music again with my old high school teacher and decided that I was going to use the opportunity to play some reach pieces, some advanced repertoire. And I studied for about another 5 or 6 years, just privately on my own.
That was with Greg Babel?
I was with Greg Babel at the Hart School.
I didn't know it was 5 or 6 years. I thought it was like a couple of years. That's awesome.
Yeah, I want to say, 25 or 26. And, obviously I was busy. So I do like
Right.
1 or 2 pieces a semester, or if it was a sonata, like 1 or 2 movements a semester. That's what I had time to invest. So not quite the extensive college level of focusing on music and everything. But I did
still,
that.
Still a devotion to go back and say, I'm going to do this again as the new and improved version of myself.
Right. I think the real catalyst for that was one day I was reminded of the existence of Fantasy Impromptu. It's a really great Chopin piece. It's very showy, right? It's such a it's a show off piece, right?
Yeah.
And I
And
think I watched with like Lili or Lang Lang, I forget his name. One of the classical pianists
he just
play it.
performed with Lady Gaga.
Oh, really? I did
Yeah, I
not know
think
that.
so. On that big Elton John.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. I watched him do that, and whoever it was performed at like literally the fastest tempo you could possibly take it at. It just,
But beautifully,
but
right?
yeah, still executed flawlessly, right? Like when you listen to Horowitz play it, it's too slow for my taste. I like the faster versions.
But
And I remember
he probably has a really good reason for playing at that speed.
Horowitz generally has a really good reason for everything he does, which is his interpretation is usually really, really good.
So you know, you're. I got to this sort of point in the story too with Ben Bishop, and I think it kind of happened to you too, where you had done a lot of really great stuff in Connecticut, and then started to realize that you were becoming one of the bigger fish in a very very small pond.
Right.
With Ben in production, we were talking about how he wasn't there yet, but he could see the ceiling. He could see what the limitations were.
Yeah.
And in Connecticut, you and I had a really great time whenever we were together. We were in a Motown band for a little bit, which was
Oh
a
yeah.
hot dumpster fire, but actually is as hot of and fiery as it was. I learned a whole lot of stuff from that band, and I can never I don't think there was any bad blood between any of the instrumentalists.
Yeah. I yes, that's
um,
a perfect way to put it.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
But and so there was a point where you went to Nashville after Ben or before Ben?
much afterwards, he
Okay,
had been there for several years already before I had arrived.
so you had decided at some point, I've gotten everything I think I can get out of Connecticut, and now it's time to make a move. And you
Yeah.
go on to do some pretty incredible things in Nashville, and I want to get to that very soon. But can you tell me what that experience was like? I imagine you in a dusty saloon with a shot in front of you, looking in the mirror, going, "Well, it's now or never." Can you kind of give me what that was like?
So it's a little less glamorous than that. It was definitely it was definitely drawing a lot of influence from people I was playing with at the time. So that band Motown was incredibly important to me in my development as well too. I met a musician named Stephen Pertessis, whose stage name was Stephen Gregory.
He's lined up to do the show once he figures out his mic
Yeah.
issues.
All right. Excellent. You should definitely talk to him. A phenomenal musician and a really important person sort of along my line, my development of my career and whatnot. So anyways, I met him doing the Motown gig. He subbed in and he remembered me and he had an original project and he called me up one day and had me fill in for him. And that led me to meeting some other musicians, Mike O'Mara and this guy named Mark Fusco. And so basically, I played with Steve and Mike and Mark in different bands, and sometimes together, doing the cover band thing and the wedding band thing, and making money at bars, and in the summer months doing more performances and sort of like outdoor stuff and various weddings. And the thing about those gigs is that there's sort of a pay ceiling and there's also a day of the week ceiling. So
That's true. Yeah, yes, I know.
yeah,
Yeah, I know
so
that. Yeah.
basically what happens is in a place like Connecticut, during the winter months, live entertainment is usually Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday, like maybe some kind of daytime thing Sunday. And I think if you're a gigging musician, most like the rates for gigging musicians in Connecticut for like bar gigs or whatever are about like 100 to 150 bucks, sometimes 200 if you're really lucky. And the
Plus a
wedding,
sandwich.
yeah, maybe, sometimes everything's different. Sometimes you get a bar tab, sometimes you don't. And then the weddings are like, 350 to 450. And wedding season is only one part of the year. In the summer, it's a little better. There's more stuff going on. But you can't sustain yourself in Connecticut just 3 days a week of performing. And so you have to like perform and teach. And even then, you're looking at like 40, 45,000 a year. And you're also looking at playing the same
Gross.
bars and clubs.
Gross 45.
Yeah,
Not net.
gross
Not net.
45, not take home. That's important. And that's assuming you are maxing out all the time, which is not common
And
because,
doing your taxes.
and yes,
There's a
and
lot of
doing,
musicians. I do them. I do them.
yeah.
There's a lot of musicians that don't.
So you do your taxes, musicians. Otherwise, it'd be hard to get loans and things later on in life.
Yeah.
There's a ceiling, and the ceiling is both a venue and place ceiling, and it's also a monetary ceiling. And all of these musicians who I'm mentioning are a little bit older. And so one of the common themes that they all sort of said to me is don't stay in Connecticut, move. Go somewhere like LA or New York City or Nashville and pursue opportunities there. Try to get in with big national touring acts if you want to perform, or try to get into the studio work. Escape sort of the limited ceiling of Connecticut, right? And so I listened to them, and it took me some time. There was a season that I played with a wedding band that I think really shot my confidence up, where for keyboard players, there's basically three, I would say, major keyboard skills to kind of pick up. There's piano playing, and that will always be important. Depending on the style of music playing, there's Hammond organ playing, right? So like if you're playing like country and blues and maybe some rock, you definitely want to know your way around a Hammond B3 or some, equivalent like C3 or A100, whatever. And then there's synthesizers and, modern music programming and whatnot. And so that wedding band season really sort of bumped my confidence with that. And I felt very well equipped to sort of go off into the world and try and play at a higher level. And again, like I said, I had this whole period in my 20s of really getting my chops together, really getting things together with both, my technique and my understanding of music. So I felt ready. And a buddy of mine who I had been performing with wanted to move down, and he moved down a little bit before me. And so I basically followed him. And it was helpful to have friends. So this buddy is not Ben 10. His name's Dean Purificato, or not
Ben Bishop.
Ben Bishop. I meant to say Ben Bishop, who is on his podcast.
We know.
Yes. So not Ben Bishop, but Dean Purificato. And so between Ben Bishop and Dean Purificato, I was able to kind of get started and established down in Nashville. But I remember a specific moment where Steve and I were playing a duo gig down in Old Lyme, and it's out on the beach, and we're talking, I think, as we're loading in equipment. He says, man, get out of here. Just get out of Connecticut. Like,
Yeah.
Go off and try to make something of yourself while you're still young. And that's not to say that if you're old, you can't go do it, but it's definitely easier when you're younger and you have less responsibilities and less sort of financial obligations. And so
It depends too what you want to do, and for the stuff
Yes.
that you're talking about, you were bumping into that wall and saying it sounded like you needed a lot of encouragement, which is good, because obviously you were thinking things through. But after you keep walking into that same door, you gotta go through it or go around it or something.
Yeah, I think as musicians, we are constantly measuring ourselves to other people. And so I always thought that I didn't cut the mustard, that I wasn't good enough to play at the highest level. I think differently about that now. As always, I don't think I'm the best keyboardist that has ever been alive, or even the best keyboard player in Nashville. But I know that I'm good enough that put me on any gig and I'll be able to do my job pretty much like 100% of the time, unless it's like some crazy, super high technical chops.
What if you were in like a Good Charlotte tribute band?
I think anybody could play in a Good Charlotte tribute band.
Could I do it, Brett? Could I do it?
Yes, you could play in a Good Charlotte tribute band.
So you decided to move to Nashville.
Yes.
You get there, and pretty quickly, I remember talking to Ben at the time, and he said something to the extent of like, Brett is meeting people. So if I recall correctly, you're a pretty sociable guy, but you're not I wouldn't call you like a social butterfly or anything. You know, you have your circle and you're good friends and you keep
Yeah.
them good friends. But so what was that like getting to a brand new place? Uh, you know, with your what's this the stick with the backpack with the handkerchief on the end. You got a
Your
keyboard in another.
rucksack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your rucksack. You got your keyboard in another hand, and you're in a place where maybe not everybody's like a shredder jazz wizard, but I mean, you go the one time that I went to a bar in Broadway, the guy was like nailing an Allman Brothers solo, note for note, phrase for phrase, tone for tone, and that doesn't mean that's not for nothing. You know, that's a
No.
feat to accomplish. So, what was that like getting to a brand new place? You know, a Disney World of music.
Well, I would honestly still say that that first year that I moved down to Nashville is probably the best year of my life, in the sense that I sort of finally felt like I belong somewhere. And um, you are correct in that there is a ubiquitousness to music in Nashville, and there is a skill level, a cap. There are musicians in Nashville who are taking music very, very seriously, especially from the instrumentalist side of things. So the guitarists are all trying to be the best, version of Brett Mason that ever existed. For those of you who don't know, Brett Mason is
Nasty,
this very, very
nasty.
good, a big 90s country studio session musician who basically people have been copping his guitar licks forever. Um, so yeah, the skill level is very high. And in terms of making friends and meeting people, I was very lucky. My friend Dean Purificato, by the time I moved down, he had been down here already for almost a year, maybe like 8 months. And my friend Dean is very, very extroverted. You could drop him in a desert and he would find someone to make friends with. And so I was able to meet a lot of people through him. I also met some people through Ben as well too. But also Nashville has a bunch of jam sessions because there's so many musicians here. And so there was when I moved down, there was literally one on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then there were all kinds of specialty shows and concerts on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I was out every night trying to meet people, really just grinding. And unfortunately, at a certain point, the music business really is about who you know. Um, because, like you said, everybody can play in a good Charlotte cover band
Right.
if they're good enough. And
There's a lot of them out there.
right, and everybody in
Good Charlotte
Nashville,
tribute bands.
and so everybody in Nashville is good enough to play basically whatever they want to. And you'd be surprised. There are a lot of former jazz cats who have moved down to Nashville in search of, more gigs, better stages to play on, that kind of thing. Um, and so,
How
yeah.
how does that work? You know, I mean, I'm a little ignorant to it, but you just get there, and is it sort of like a Black Eyed Sally's deal on a Wednesday night where you just go and say, "Hey, you know, I just moved down here from Connecticut. I'd love to get on stage with you guys someday." And then after you do that enough times, somebody says, "Hey, why don't you come sit in with us?"
So a lot of the jams are open, right? Which literally means that every round is you sign up and there's a random bunch of musicians who all get thrown together. And a couple of the jams are definitely more curated. So some of them, they want to talk to you and make sure you actually know what you're doing before they let you up on stage. Some not so much, but the
What
skill
kind of music?
level.
What kind of music are we talking?
So most of these jam sessions were either blues or like there was one funk one. There was a country jam session, but I didn't really know that repertoire at that time. I was still learning it, so I didn't really go to that one in my first year. And then there's also sort of like a fusion jazz jam as well too here in town. And the jam sessions are always constantly changing or evolving and moving venues and things like that. Um, and so yeah, a lot of it was you'd get up and you'd play, and people would hear you, that kind of thing. And then your friends would introduce you to other people, And there are a lot of young artists. So when you look at some famous artists, right, on the radio, um, let's do a country artist, right, like Chris Stapleton.
The Dixie Chicks. Oh yeah, Chris
Yeah,
Stapleton.
sure. Or yeah, whoever it might be. Yeah, sure. Let's take the Dixie Chicks, right? So there are about 1,000 versions of the Dixie Chicks. And I don't mean to say that everybody sounds like the Dixie Chicks. What I'm saying is there are tons and tons of young artists who are trying to write songs in Nashville and work their way up through the ranks and get a major record label, um, and then eventually get played on national radio and be a national touring act. And every single country artist who you see, like the Dixie Chicks, started somewhere. They probably started in Nashville playing songs, maybe doing the Broadway thing down here, but they started somewhere, and all of those people need band members and players. And so the culture of Nashville is you work for artists who are trying to rise up through the ranks. The artists pay you to be in the band, because it's not like, say, Dierks Bentley, Chris Stapleton, Florida Georgia Line had this band that they took with them all the way through the process of becoming signed artists. They were individuals, they got signed, they hire a band of hired guns to play behind them. And you can make a lot of money this way as a musician, and it's a way for you to kind of skip the process of like being in a band and hoping that your band gets signed and you get a record label and that record takes off, right? You kind of like you skip steps. You just immediately go up to the level where you're playing with some artist or act that is touring nationally. But to do that, you have to start. So some people move to town and they get really lucky and they get that call, right? And then they're on the bus and then that's it. But most of us, 99% of us, have to play for these artists who are up and coming until our name gets passed around enough and we know the right people, where when these people graduate, like the people you know graduate to these big gigs and they remember you, when a slot opens up and they say, hey, we need a keyboard player, then they call you because they've met you, they've known the job that you've done a good job playing and performing with all these other young artists or with them. And then they are the ones who basically get your foot in the door to get on a major gig. And
so that's not an unheard of model. I mean, we see that with the musicians of Motown. We see that with the Wrecking Crew.
yeah,
Those are a little bit different. Motown was one entity, right? So
well, it's probably this. It's basically the same general path, I would say, to become that A-tier studio musician,
so
more or less. Yeah.
so I know that you have done a little bit of that. You have gotten a call and gotten on a tour bus. Maybe not for the top dream gig yet. And I know that you've also been in some very serious jam sessions. You told me that you were with like Taylor Swift's bassist and Missy Elliott's hairdresser or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about those experiences?
Yeah. So one of the really cool things about Nashville, and I mentioned this kind of feeling of being home, is that there's so many musicians here and they are all here because they love music. So what happens is a lot of times I wouldn't call them jam sessions. I would call them specialty shows get put together that are usually the ticket prices, if there are, ticket sales, they go to charity. But they're mostly put together for the musicians who play in them to have fun. And most of the time, these things are invite only. So you have to kind of break in. The one that you were talking about is this show called Loud Jams. Again, a little confusing. But Loud Jams is basically a night of musicians playing B-sides and less commonly played songs from artists of all different genres: country, pop, metal, rock, you name it. You might might hear a Steely Dan song, and then all of a sudden you're listening to, I don't know. It's super random, but a lot of fun. I played like recently. I did one of them just a few months ago before all this madness happened, and I played "Owner of a Lonely Heart" by Yes. So, and I was about to do another one, one that was like completely focused on metal and hard rock, called Rare Hair, and I was actually going to do Dream Theater's "Pull Me Under." So I was asked to do that. Like a lot of these are invite only, and they say we'll invite you to play this song, and a lot of times it's you don't even know the people you're playing with. But I
That
got
keyboard,
hooked.
there's nothing hard. That's not a hard keyboard song, is it?
No, not hard at all. Um, so, anyways, I got asked to start playing these Loud Jam shows, and I played maybe three or four of them. And I caught the attention of this guy named Tyson Leslie. And Tyson Leslie is a keyboard player, guitar player, drummer, bass player, and sings. He is an amazing musician, a super nice guy, and he has played with like Corey, what the guy from Slipknot,
Corey Taylor.
Corey Taylor.
Don't ask me why I know that.
He's played for Vixen, which is a '80s metal act. Played for a ton of different people over the course of his career, but he was responsible for inviting the keyboard players, for the various songs. And I had caught his eye or his attention. And these specialty shows would have a set of original music where they would feature some original artist in town and allow them to play like 4 or 5 of their songs. And so Tyson asked me to be his keyboardist. So keep in mind, this is a guy who's primarily a keyboard player, famous for being a keyboard player in town. But he was going to play guitar and sing when performing his original music.
Why not?
So he asked me to be his keyboardist. And, I was kind of freaking out. And I didn't know the people who were going to be in the band, because Tyson just asked me to do it. And so I show up at rehearsal, and there's a bass player and, another guitarist and a drummer and a couple backing vocalists. And we're all rehearsing. And you kind of learn in Nashville that you don't want to just like bombard musicians with questions. You want to be like, who do you play for? You got to like, what's your gig? You kind of just, you're just trying to have a good vibe and a good conversation. We call it the hang. And that's an important part of the music business, which is being easy to work with and creating a fun working environment is really important for getting gigs. Because like we said earlier, most people can play the material. So being fun to be around is important, and playing the networking game, all that kind of stuff, it's together. So I don't ask these people who they are. I know their names, but I don't know who they play for. And we get to the show, and they are introducing us, and they're going around, and they're basically saying everyone's credentials. It's like, this is Tyson. He's played with all these people. And then they get to the guitarist. It's like, this is RJ Ronquillo. He plays for Thompson Square. Thompson Square is a big country act down here. Then they get to the bass player. It's like, this is Luis Espelette. He plays bass for Trace Atkins. And then they get to the drummer. It's like, this is Matt Billingsley. He's about to leave for a year to go on tour with Taylor Swift. And I'm just, I'm sitting here, my jaw is dropping like, oh, good.
And this is Brett from Connecticut.
Yeah, and it's like, this is me who's been in town for like 4 months at this point and has done literally nothing of note. And they're like, and Brett Sandler on keys,
4 months. 4 months to get to that spot is, that's no, you gotta pat yourself on the back for that. You must have done something right, because you said if everybody is a killer player, then they all cancel each other out. So what else do you have?
Well, everybody is a killer player, but not everybody has the right mindset or work ethic. So you wouldn't believe the number of gigs that I've, like, getting started sort of, with these lesser known artists, there's still a lot of wheat and chaff, right? That kind of vibe. And so I'd show up, and some of the musicians wouldn't have the music learned properly. And to me, that's mind-boggling that you're being paid for a gig, you show up to rehearsal, and you don't know your parts. And so for everything that I did, I would chart out the music. I'd have a chart, because basically I would always make the assumption that I'm not going to be good enough to remember and memorize everything perfectly. I'm going to be using a chart to make sure I play it perfectly every single time. And that's a totally normal and well accepted thing in Nashville. The second thing was I'm going to learn every part that I get note for note, and I'm going to match it sound for sound too. So if they use a particular tone on the organ, I'm going to produce that exact tone. If there's a particular synth part, I'm going to make the synth sound exactly like it is on the record, not just use some random sound from my keyboard. I'm going to go in and manually make sure that that sound is pristine. And so doing that, playing parts note for note, making sure that the sounds were on point, and having the music learned and not wasting anybody's time meant that every gig that I left, the musician or the artist or the people there know that I could do a good job, and attention to detail. So I would say that's the most, if whoever's listening to this who's a musician and wants to go on and try and make a big career of music, attention to detail is literally the most important thing I can tell them.
Yeah.
Listen carefully, get everything pristine.
Before switching gears a little bit, before this whole nightmare happened, especially for, I mean, not just you, but I mean, any kind of person that is relying on any sort of gigging economy. I mean, for you,
Yeah.
it's you're more on the extreme side. And but what was a typical day like for you? Because I know a lot of it was contingent on you going places and looking for opportunities. Or maybe that was more of something that had happened in the past, but I know at one point you were saying, I wake up, I go down to this street, I play brunch, I do this, and then I'm gigging from some days noon till 1 a.m. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So in the beginning, there was this grinding, as you would say, where um, at the very beginning, I didn't have a lot of gigs, but as I was there longer, I was following this advice that you should just take every call that comes in. Whoever says, like, I have something for you, like when you're first getting started out, you want to cast this really wide net. You want to play with as many people as possible, right? Because you're trying to build out your network. And so a lot of times the daytime would look like the artist that I was playing with or whoever I was going to be performing with for that week would be calling rehearsals. And so rehearsals is basically really for the artist to get their stuff together. So you need to show up to rehearsal with all your material learned. So the mornings would be like rehearsals. Whatever spare time I would have would go to practicing and learning material for the next rehearsal or doing the sound design to make sure all the sounds were correct. And then I would play the gigs. And it's not uncommon for musicians in Nashville who are playing locally to have like a gig in the morning and then a break and then have another gig at night. So there's the artist stuff down here, but there's also a big cover scene. And the cover scene down here is just loosely called Broadway. It refers to the street in downtown where there's literally bars and clubs on every side of the street. And they have music from 10 a.m. in the morning all the way to 2 a.m. at night in 4-hour blocks. So a 10 to 2, a 2 to 6, a 6 to 10, and another 10 to 2
Yikes.
in every bar. And there's like 35, 40, 50, I mean, I don't even know how many. And then that's not counting all the other random things and all the stuff. There's so much work to be had. There are a lot of musicians competing for all that work, but if you wanted to, you could literally play for 16 hours a day down here in Nashville if you wanted to. And so in those early days, I was taking everything that came in, whatever it was, Broadway, artist gigs, studio work, whatever it was. And so the days were always just go do your obligations, whatever they are, the rehearsals or the gigs, and then be practicing and learning the next set of material. And it's been like that for a very, very long time for me, where once I get done with one gig, I'm learning the material for the next one. Because unless you have a gig in Nashville that you do like every week for multiple days and it pays you well enough that you don't have to do any other gigs, you oftentimes need to learn lots and lots of different sets of music, lots of different artists' music, things like that. So
So you could just, if you were getting started there, you just walk into places, or do you have to wait to get that invitation? If you're talking about those, I don't want to say low level, but those like those busy jobs.
Yeah, so you need to know somebody, or the artist has to reach out to you. And so it can take a little bit to get the ball rolling, but once the ball starts rolling and more people see you, more musicians who are in bands see you. So a lot of bands have a band leader, so to speak, and the band leader is usually responsible for constructing the band for the artist. So the artist just has to worry about doing artist stuff and doesn't have to worry about the music being correct. That's the band leader's job. So if a band leader needs to fill out a role and the band leader knows you do a good job because they saw you play with XYZ person when you were sharing a bill at some random show. So sharing a bill just means like many different artists played, all at once. Then they say, oh, okay, yeah, we can hire that guy, and you get the call.
So, when did you start uh, moving away from those gigs and then sort of getting the things that you've some of the war stories that you've shared, where you got to go on tour on a festival adjacent to South by Southwest, or you got to play these like the big there's a Pink Floyd cover show or a Radiohead cover show or something like that. So
Yeah.
for you personally, when did you start having to do less of the, yeah, I'll play till 2 a.m., 5 nights a week, and then more of getting to say no and actually getting the calls that led to either better experiences or better paychecks?
I would say, I would say maybe probably a year and a half in to about 2 years in, maybe a year in. It builds, right? You usually get like a little piece of something. So at the year mark, I started playing with this group called Black Jacket Symphony. This group performs iconic albums, uh, song for song, sound for sound. So I have done Led Zeppelin 4 with them. I performed that, and I've also performed Purple Rain, so the famous Prince album with them. They also have another band that does like more corporate based stuff, but does like big corporate functions. But this band is the one that I've been on a tour bus with and things like that. And that kind of came to me at the year mark, but I didn't get a lot of it. I was being treated as a sub to begin with, and then as time went on, I was asked to fill out permanent roles on shows where I'm the permanent keyboard player now on the Purple Rain show, and then I sub in for more shows. Before this all happened, I was supposed to go out for touring here in Nashville is usually like you go out for a couple days and you come home, for like say a month or 2 months in a row. So it's going to be out for a month and a half doing that, like 3 or 4 days out at a time, performing The Wall with them. So
Wow.
I got
That's
that.
that would have been one hell of an experience.
Yeah, this band, if anyone wants to Google them, the Black Jacket Symphony, they bring like $500,000 worth of production with them to every show. So there's these beautiful light shows behind you while you're playing. It looks amazing in photographs. Very very cool experience. A lot of
No fun.
former American Idol contestants and voice contestants end up in Nashville, especially if they have a country focus, and they tend to have I would say another tier of gig over just like the local thing. And so I've been playing with some of them at various points in my career, and have done different shows with them. And usually they tour heavily in their home states. So I've been out to like Iowa, I've been out to California, um, really all over with some of these artists who have been on The Voice. So Adam Cunningham, Cree Harrison, she was an American Idol runner-up.
Did
I
you say Creed?
performed
Did you say Creed?
Cree,
Wow.
Kree, Harrison, really phenomenal vocalist. Cat named Pryor Barrett I've played with, and also did a couple shows with this guy named Casey James, who was also, forget where he finished on American Idol. I think he had a record, like a country record that was out for a while. Um, and again, those things kind of trickled in, and it's all about like building critical mass. So I would say the point where I've really started saying no, it started maybe a year and a half, where I started like turning down really low level stuff. And now it's kind of like I turn down some medium level stuff if I'm too busy or don't want to do it, because I'm trying to just focus on the big fish at this point in my career. Um, yeah. So it's a sliding scale. You know, it started about a year in, and I would say just now, you know, April 15th was the 3 year mark. I would say this last half a year is really where I started to say no to like gigs that might pay me like 100 to 150 to 200 bucks for my time. You know,
Right.
so
Was there anything at any point in your experience, either I'm imagining when you first got there, but I guess this could be at any time when you realized that you had a deficit, either in your playing or your theory or your sort of the way that you viewed music, where you said, "Oh, I have to fix this now." I'm thinking of myself when I've seen somebody. I mean, this sounds stupid, but I've seen like a really good guitar player just have a relaxed forearm, or like
right.
their left elbow is so relaxed, and I think, what the hell am I doing? I'm in a master's program. I need to fix that right now. But that's a very specific thing. And then there's times when I've been like, oh, I need to be able to get students to play recitals, because that was something that I really struggled with. I got the kids to play really well, but they would just play in the lesson really well or at home really well. So is there anything for you that you said, oh my gosh, this needs to be fixed right now?
So many times. So there's macro level stuff and then there's micro level stuff. If I if I played a gig and thought to myself that my performance was subpar, I will go home and play that material over and over and over again
Yeah.
so that that never happens to me ever again. And I have to do that from time to time because I would say as musicians, you know, sometimes we get a little lazy. Sometimes we take shortcuts. And again, we might be talking about like one tiny mistake that nobody noticed, but down here it's all about perfection. And so, you know, I will go home and I will practice that until my fingers bleed.
Right.
So there's that micro level stuff, but there have been tons of macro level moments. Big ones in Nashville have come down to really learning how analog synths work and how to craft analog synth tones. I had to do that for a couple different shows now. I had to really do that for Purple Wayne. That stuff is all old school 80s analog synths, the Oberheims, so OB8, OBX. I've had to do that when I first moved to Nashville when I realized I knew literally nothing about playing organ, um, because playing organ is super important in Nashville here. And you really need to know how the drawbars work, what kind of tones you can get out of them, what to do in certain situations. While the organ is a keyboard instrument, it has no sustain to any of the notes. So as soon as your fingers leave the keys, it just stops playing, makes no noise. So you have to play in this very legato manner, and it changes the way that you can play. Like piano licks don't sound good on organ just because of the nature of the instrument. So you have to play it a different way. So that was a huge thing that I kind of needed to acquire or fix, I guess you could say. Um, when I would, and then, you know, going back, you know, through time, realizing that I didn't really know what I was teaching to classical students, and I needed to like, oh, I better get this together. You know,
Right. Right.
I don't want to be
Absolutely.
like a fraud. And then, you know, the same thing in college when I realized, wow, I don't really understand how music works at all, and I didn't learn my scales and my theory properly. You know, it wasn't maintained, and I need to go back and do the shedding. So many times, and when you are presented with those moments, it's an opportunity to you know dig in and evolve.
It sounds like a lot of, you know, I recall there were times when you were expressing a lot of frustration of having to do the same thing over and over again, and it feels like what you're telling me today is the way that you got to a more comfortable place had a lot to do with musicianship, but also with like your own evolution as a human man. Like just, you know, uh, deciding that you're going to say no to the things that you can start saying no to, taking chances. I remember you told me about a tour once, we don't have to name it, where you said, yeah, we kind of, you know, pissed all the money away and it wasn't really worth it, but the experience was worth it. Um,
Well, right. Especially if the experience teaches you, I don't want to do this kind of thing,
yeah.
or this is not the environment I'm looking for, whatever it might be.
Or gets you connected to somebody else, then where you can, you know, connect with somebody else.
Yeah.
So what, you know, obviously it sounds like one of the possible, the many possible out of the many different Nashville trajectories, one of them is certainly to get picked up by the next so and so, and then go on the road for 11 months and make however much money you make, and then come home and do that. Whereas, like, you know, Ben Bishop and Casey did a lot of like the co-op songwriting stuff, and then
Yeah.
that's how they found their success.
There's a ton of different paths through the music biz, and they all have their pluses and minuses. I could talk about what I think of some of them if you want me to.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna come to a close pretty soon,
Okay.
because I am gonna wake up in about 6 hours. But yeah, I'm sure we could talk all night about that. Why don't you tell me? Yeah, why don't we do that? We'll go for another 10 minutes or so. Why don't you tell me what your thoughts are about the different paths
Yeah, so
in Nashville?
they all have pluses and minuses. They all share a lot of the same things that you'll need to succeed: work ethic, attention to detail. There will probably be points in your career where you have to do some undesirable things over and over and over again, and you may be in situations that you find less than ideal. So there is the sideman hired gun thing, and there are a couple ways that you gain success in that category. So maybe you start with an artist that's relatively unknown, but you follow them up through their success curve. So as they become more successful, you become more successful. And if they eventually get signed and, you know, have their singles be played on national radio, then you might have a long, rewarding career ahead of you with that artist. That is a way to do it. And again, it's a little bit of a gamble because you don't know who's going to take off, right? So you play with a lot of people and wait till one of them takes off. Or you get a call from someone who's already established and you do it that way. There's the whole songwriting, publishing arm of things, which again is like you're trying to build your contacts and you're trying to write for the right publishers. And if you can get some good song placements, you can really make a lot of money. But in the beginning, you're probably going to be writing a lot of songs and having them fall on deaf ears and having them go nowhere. That's probably the thing I know the least about.
Ben had a folder, and it was a gold mine. It was a gold mine of things. I just wish we could have had time. Maybe next time we get a bottle of wine and just go through that folder, because I'll tell you, some of the stuff there was golden.
Yeah. And then so finally, there's sort of the session musician thing. I would say this is probably the hardest to break into. And this is where I would say there is the highest level of skill, because the way that sessions are done in Nashville is you all listen to the demo tape, and then it gets charted out and you just get handed the chart, and then you record 2 to 3 passes of the core instruments: keyboard, bass, drums, um, guitar, all tracking at the same time. And you do it for 2 to 3 times, and then that's it. you get 2 to 3 passes on the song, and what you lay down needs to.
Are you getting paid for this?
Oh, of course, yeah. When you do sessions, right? When you're going into a studio, the producer, or whoever it is, or the
Oh,
artist.
I thought you were saying this is how to get into that. You're talking about
Oh, no, no,
once
no.
you have the gig.
I'm saying once you have the gig, getting into it is extremely difficult, and it's sometimes there are situations where an artist brings their own band in to record. That's pretty uncommon, but it's really about maybe knowing someone who already does it and getting the right introduction. I am very fortunate to have met sort of the #1 studio call here in for keyboards for Nashville. His name is Dave Cohen, and he's really taught me a lot about
He's one of us.
musicianship and getting things right, all that kind of stuff. But he basically said that he got started because he did an incredibly good job for artists, and they introduced him to the right people. And then producers really liked the way that he played on recordings, and he kept getting recommended. And so, like, the last time I talked to him, he was recording the new Florida Georgia Line album. Like, that's the level of session recording that he's doing. But again, it's just like you have to do a really good job and keep rising through the ranks and meeting the right people. But session musicians make a lot of money. It can be very, very lucrative. If you get the right national act, you can be salaried, and you may be looking at, you know, 6 figures to like 80,000, depending on the artist and how busy they are and what kind of level of fame or notoriety. And then there's all sorts of tiers downward. Studio musicians get paid union rates for their time, so lots of money. If you get there, if you get to the very top level, which is extremely difficult to do. But the point that is really key is you're not going to become a studio musician by living in Idaho or Connecticut or Massachusetts, because there are no studios there that record anything.
There was that one studio that we recorded our Motown demo in. Do you remember that studio?
Yeah, I remember that studio.
We got to fight those guys.
I'd like to forget that studio, to be honest with you.
I can't believe we paid for that.
Yeah,
we'll have to make.
They should have paid us to record there.
Yeah, we'll have to make an NSFW podcast sometime.
Yeah,
where we just go through all the horror stories.
That'd be a lot of fun.
So you are clearly on the path of hired gun. Can you hear the baby in the background?
I cannot.
You woke up.
I don't think your mic's that sensitive.
Good. You are on this path of hired gun, and it's working out for you. I remember at one point you were doing some recording and releasing of music. You had the Bret Sandler trio a long time ago, and then you had Thick, and then you had I think you had a few things after that. Does that play? Is that gonna come back? Do you see yourself writing and recording more music, whether or not that's jazz or fusion or just Snarky Puppy meets David Bowie? Is that something that you see in your future?
100%. So I don't know if it'll be that kind of genre. Again, as a musician, you're like the sum collection of your experiences. So in doing this grinding down here in Nashville, there's not a lot of time for my own artistry, or even sort of the desire to do it, right? I've been very focused on this thing and want to sort of see it through. But I also don't want to tour forever. I don't want to be on a tour bus when I'm like 45, 50. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a young man's game for certain. I want to do it mostly because I want to have that experience, right? I want to play like the biggest venues, Coliseums, that kind of thing, the big music festivals, the 40 to 60,000 seaters, those kinds of things. I want that experience, and of course I want to make the money that goes along with it, but I don't want to do it forever. And so quarantine has happened, and I've had a lot of free time. So what I've decided to do at that time is I've been doing remote tracking, so it's a type of session work, but that's not really where I'm going with this. I've been writing music for sync, which is just the process of composing music that goes in TV programs or movies or trailers or commercials. Our friend Ben Bishop does quite a bit of this, actually, and can be a whole part of like the songwriting creation process and publishing and all those kinds of things. But I've been thinking a lot about getting into that, maybe writing music for in a commercial sense, right? So TV, video games, movies, that kind of thing. And that's about like what the song needs. So it's not necessarily about any genre. If I do something, if I do come out with some kind of original music, it will probably be very experimental and electronic focused. It'll be a
Uh-oh.
culmination of, yeah, I know, right? It'll be a culmination of all of the things that I've sort of learned about sound design, right? About creating sounds. So it's been a huge focus of the last couple of years, getting sent material. And so there's this pad, right? So producers nowadays, they use a lot of electronic instrumentation, a lot of stuff that's generated by computers. And in a lot of situations, the artist just plays with a backing track that has all those parts in it. But in other situations, they need the keyboard player to play those parts. So I've spent a lot of time learning how to recreate those sounds. And as a result, I didn't enjoy it when I first started doing it because I was extremely bad at it. But I've gotten a lot better at it now, and I don't find it such a laborious process. I oftentimes find it really rewarding. And so if I did do some kind of original music, it would be in those lines. I have a few songs that I've worked on. So maybe at some point in the future, there might be an album of very selfish music. But more likely than not, the composing that I'll be doing going forward will be meant to be submitted to, libraries that cater towards, TV sync clients and things like that, because
I'd
that's
love
an
to hear that.
opportunity to collect royalties.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your the things that come out of your
Brain.
no, seriously, the things that come out of your brain now, because the last gig I played with you, where we were doing that kind of stuff, was at that retirement home in the Farmington
That was a
Exchange.
jazz gig, right?
Yeah, and that was a jazz gig, and that was a jazz gig. But so I was going to ask you the question of where do you see yourself going when everything goes back to normal? But I think you've kind of answered that. You have a path that you're on. It sounds like you're pretty established in your circle, and you have your sights, your immediate sights set on continuing this upward rise. Let's finish with this question.
Okay.
What is the quarantine doing to people like you who and you share as much as you want or as little as you want? That's totally fine.
Yeah.
But so the music producers, the guys who just came off tour with so and so, they're probably fine, or at least they're going to be okay for the foreseeable future. But for people like you and
Yeah.
people who are on the streets every day grinding, or people that just got to town, or people that haven't gotten that gig yet, um, what is what's life like?
Wow. So um, a lot of those people are, well, they are completely out of work, to put it bluntly. So the CDC's guidelines, how many people can be in an area, basically make it impossible to have any kind of concert. So all of the touring and concert venues is basically the dates that I've had are either canceled or just like postponed indefinitely. For the musicians who do a lot of the local stuff, they play Broadway, they play the bars. They are they're not working either. So all of that has been closed down. Nashville is going to try and reopen them, but has to the mayor just recently released his plan. There have to be these periods of infection numbers going down and things like that for the various phases to happen. And the phase 3 is the beginning of the live music phase. So I think, honestly, most of the people who don't have some major gig, who aren't on retainer or salary, right, they are hurting, but they are finding ways to, they're finding ways, and they're innovating. So a lot of the musicians I know are doing, Facebook Live concerts from home and putting up their Venmo or their PayPal, whatever they use to receive payments digitally, and saying, hey, if you enjoyed the show, send me a little tip, and doing that to make some money in the short term. But it definitely does not replace the full-time gigging income that they lost for certain. So definitely, the destruction of the gig economy during the quarantine is definitely hurting musicians here for certain, and I would imagine everywhere, because there's nowhere to play. But like I said, I've been trying to track from home, or compose music. So I think musicians are starting to take a look at a lot of different avenues now with how to monetize their art digitally, whether that's making YouTube videos and starting like a Patreon account, which has been done before. Like these aren't brand new models, right? Like performing digitally is not some, you know,
No.
not some like amazing innovation that just happened.
But when you
Um,
have your back to the wall, I'm very lucky to be in a position where I have a profession that has a
yeah,
yearly contract, and I know that that money's not going anywhere. But when
right.
you have your back to the wall, it's not just, oh, I'm going to perform online later for fun. It's I I got to
Yeah,
pay
like this
electricity.
is the
Do
money.
do I
Yeah,
want to eat? And that's a
yeah.
very real thing.
Well, it's a really interesting, I think, meta conversation about how society values music. Technology has made music really, really cheap, and so there's not the same money that used to be in it. Like the cats who were doing all this stuff in the '80s, they made out really, really well. But nowadays, the pay scale isn't there, and so I think that it's a great move that they let people who are self-employed or who are gig workers be able to file for unemployment. I think that's a huge step in the right direction. But the irony sometimes just washes me over me. Most people who now have a lot of time on their hands because of quarantine, right? What are they filling that time with? Well, maybe
Dark Souls.
hobbies. Yeah, they're filling it with entertainment, right? They're filling it with creative entertainment. So whether it's music or television or movies or video games, right? These are the mediums that people are consuming during this time. And I wish society would sort of value that a little bit more. So it would be nice to kind of, see more acknowledgement in this trying time for musicians and the struggles that they're
Yeah.
going through, and not kind of look at it as this dirty little thing, that doesn't need to be
Yeah.
taken care of.
I in an unreleased episode right now, which will be released next week. Me and my guests talk about sort of we scratched the surface a little bit of why is it what's the value in being a musician, and what does that sort of mean in the big picture. But that's a huge conversation that requires a lot of thought to it.
Yeah, I
As
think a
as
little
we
beyond the scope of what we have left in our
as
conversation
we
tonight.
as we as we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to promote? I'll get a text, I'll get a list from you, and then I'll put that at the link. But just to put it in the video, is there anything that you want to promote right now?
Yeah, sure. So eventually, my website, brettsandler.com, will have a lot more material from me. It'll have, the things that I've been composing and working on, and it will have, a little more content to it. So if you're interested in kind of following my journey, you can just go to brettsandler.com. And there'll be links to my Instagram on brettsandler.com as well too. So if you want to just throw that up
Killer
there.
player. Go watch him play. He's really, really fantastic. The cool thing about music that people don't understand is that they think that the best way to find the best music is to look for the best. And that makes sense. If you say, I want to enjoy a steak, you're going to go to a place that you think has the best steak. And in the beauty about music is that we are all trying to be the best version of ourselves. So if you're somebody who says, oh, well, yeah, sure, I'll listen to jazz piano. You don't just have to ask the Echo to do it. You can go look at someone else, because Brett Sandler is going to have one take on something, while the guy down the street is going to have a different take, and they'll be in different. You guys will be in different levels of maturity, and perhaps you're not as good as that guy or he's not as good as you. But it doesn't mean that we should be ignoring it, because there's something really special to you know so many people wouldn't be musicians if there wasn't
Yeah.
something to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a beautiful final note, I think I touched upon it just a little bit earlier, but through my musical journey, I've always thought that I wasn't quite good enough or I wasn't the best, and I thought that because I wasn't the best, that I wasn't deserving or I shouldn't pursue this or whatever it was, and I think that that is a huge false dichotomy because two things. people learn and get better at different rates. I've had a lot of periods of exponential growth throughout my music career where I felt like my playing and my understanding just like all of a sudden just leapfrogged way ahead. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, I'm way better than that person now, right? So there's longevity, and that can make you become a better player than maybe some of the players you might be comparing yourself to as well. But then again, there's probably something that you can do that is like the sum total of your unique experiences that has value. And so maybe you aren't like Jesus Molina, who's an incredible jazz pianist. Check him out. Or Hiromi Uehara. Or
Oh,
maybe
I
you're
know
not.
her. I
Yeah. Or
remember that.
maybe you're not Brent Mason, right? But I guarantee you
She had
there's
the bass
something.
player from to ruin your moment right
Yeah.
here.
No, go ahead.
She had the Fifth Element bass player, right?
I think so.
Doesn't he have
Yeah.
like he had like the cool glasses?
Yes. Oh no, that's the guitarist.
Oh,
Dave.
okay.
I think it's Dave Fusiak is his name. I think he's a Berkeley
I
professor.
was like I'm watching Twin Peaks or something.
Yeah, no,
Continue.
he's out there.
Finish your beautiful moment.
Yeah, and so whoever watches this, I think you said some of your students might watch it. It's just stick with it, right? Stick with it and realize that even if you are not the most technically gifted or best musician, whatever it is, you can be best at something, and your unique musical journey, right, matters, right? It matters in all of this, and you have something to share with the world musically. Most of the pop songs we listen to on the radio, they aren't some amazing they aren't some amazing innovation of like musical harmony and melody. They're pentatonic melodies over, 4, 6, 5 chord progressions, but we like them and they're pleasing to our ear and they bring
And they
joy
mean
to millions
something.
of people and they mean something. And so, whoever's listening to this, if you feel like you're not the best or you want to give up, I just would say stick with it for longer and see where it takes you.
Thank you for hanging out with me.
Yeah, this was really fun.